Last Thanksgiving at exactly 2:17 p.m., as the turkey cooled on the dining room table, my Aunt Anne pushed back her chair, stood up in front of 12 family members, and announced she had filed papers to take custody of my 15-year-old sister. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the carving knife. That's when I realized she hadn't come for dinner. She had come for war. 5 minutes later, I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and called my lawyer. I'm Margaret Collins, though most people just call me Maggie. I'm 58 years old, a retired elementary school teacher from upstate New York, and for the last 4 years my entire world has revolved around raising my younger sister, Emily. She's only 15, a bright-eyed girl with a love of drawing and an obsession with K-pop bands, far too young to have lost both of our parents in that tragic car accident 2 winters ago. When it happened, the family looked to me, elder sister, steady hand, caretaker, to step up. And I did. It wasn't even a question in my mind. I packed up Emily's clothes, her sketchbooks, her worn-out purple sneakers, and I brought her into the 2-bedroom home I've lived in for over 20 years. I might not have been the wealthiest, and Lord knows my pension only stretches so far. But Emily never went to bed hungry, and she never went to school without her projects finished. I taught her how to cook grilled cheese when she was anxious about going to high school. I drove her to every art class across town, and I was there late into the night when panic attacks from nightmares kept her awake. To Emily, I wasn't just her sister. I became a stand-in mother. Which is why what my Aunt Anne tried to do cut me deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. She's my late mother's sister, the successful one in the family, at least by her own definition. Anne is in her early 60s, a polished corporate consultant from Boston, always in the finest shoes and jewelry. She's the type who name-drops her clients, orders the $24 glass of wine without flinching, and pats you on the shoulder as if you should be grateful for her attention. Growing up, I had a rocky relationship with her. She always considered me the plain one, the responsible but unremarkable teacher who stayed behind in our childhood town while she soared off to climb social ladders. Anne rarely visited when our parents were ill, and when she did, it felt like an inconvenience. Yet here she was at Thanksgiving, standing in front of my family, declaring her plan to take custody of Emily. She didn't raise a hand when the world fell apart for us, but apparently, now that Emily was blossoming into a talented young woman with a bright future, Anne decided to insert herself. If you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, you know how humiliating it feels. That icy rush of blood to your face, like all the oxygen has been stolen. That's how it felt when she said the words. Because here's what's truly at stake. Everything I've poured myself into for the last 2 years of my life, every sacrifice, every tear, every night holding Emily's hand through grief, was being threatened. Emily deserves better, Anne had the nerve to say once in private, in that clipped, patronizing tone of hers. You've done what you can, Maggie, but don't you think she'd be better off in a bigger city? Better opportunities? Private school? College prep courses? She tried to disguise her cruelty as generosity, but I could see through the softness in her words. It wasn't about opportunity or Emily's future. This was about control, about Anne putting herself on display as the savior, about proving that once again she had the authority and the resources to swoop in and claim dominance over someone else's life. What she didn't anticipate was how much Emily loved me and how fiercely I'd fight for her. Financially, I wasn't on stable ground. My pension left me with about $2,800 a month. After mortgage, utilities, groceries, and Emily's activities, some months ended with only $200 left in savings. Anne, on the other hand, bragged about pulling 6 figures, taking weekend spa trips to Cape Cod, traveling for work on her clients' dimes. So yes, in the eyes of the court, maybe it would look like she could provide more. But money can't measure love, And Emily knew that as well as I did. The stakes couldn't have been higher. If Anne succeeded, Emily wouldn't just lose her home, she'd lose her stability, her sense of safety, her chosen family. And for me, it would mean watching the one purpose keeping me going since our parents died be stripped away. Could you imagine that? Being told that all your sacrifices, every sleepless night, every hard choice, were suddenly insufficient? That someone else with deeper pockets could simply walk in and rewrite your life's work? That's why when Anne announced it publicly at our Thanksgiving table, I didn't crumble. Not entirely. My heart did stop for a moment. Yes. My hands shook. Yes. But beneath it was something else. A flicker. A tiny, hot spark of defiance. I may have been a retired teacher, a caregiver without wealth or status, but there was nothing that could erase the truth of what I'd built with Emily. And if Anne wanted a fight, she had just picked one with the wrong woman. When people talk about betrayal, they often describe it in abstract ways, like being stabbed in the back, or a rug pulled from beneath their feet. But to me, betrayal felt like a sound, a sharp crack, as though some invisible glass inside me had shattered and scattered across the floor of my chest. It happened right there, at my dining table. The same table that had seen 30 years of birthdays, Christmases, spilled gravy, and late-night homework. Anne stood at the head like she owned the moment, her tailored cranberry red blazer catching the light from my chandelier, her gold bracelet clinking as she held up the legal folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, her voice ringing louder than the scraping of Emily's fork against her plate, "as of Monday morning, I've filed papers seeking custody of Emily. It's time she had a real chance in life." I froze, mid-slice of turkey. Steam coiled upward from the meat. And for some reason, I noticed how the gravy boat trembled ever so slightly in my sister Marie's hand. She didn't dare set it down. Silence engulfed us. No sound except the faint whir of the refrigerator motor and my niece shifting in her chair. My throat tightened like a vice. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice cracked, and I actually pressed my palm against the side of the table, steadying myself because there was a rush of dizziness. Anne smiled, or something meaner, thinner than a smile. "Maggie, it's not personal. But let's be realistic. You've done fine. Admirable, really. But the court should know what's in Emily's best interest. Private schooling, better medical coverage, even travel opportunities. You can't give her those." Her words sliced cleaner than the carving knife still clenched in my fist. My hands were trembling, but I dared not move. Inside, my brain screamed, "How dare you say my sister isn't enough? How dare you erase everything I've sacrificed?" And then Emily's soft voice broke through. "Aunt Anne, stop." She looked petrified, her green eyes darting between us, her fork abandoned, mashed potatoes streaked like pale paint across her plate. My heart cracked all over again. At 15, she shouldn't have been forced into the middle of this battlefield. But Anne didn't flinch. "I know this is upsetting, sweetie," Anne cooed, her tone dripping with cultivated sweetness that felt like poison. "But one day, you'll thank me. Boston has schools with art programs you can't find here. You'll be around kids from better families, make connections that actually matter." That was it. The mask slipped, and I heard the truth. She didn't see Emily as a child to be nurtured. She saw her as a canvas, a project, a jewel to display as her achievement. "I should have known," I whispered, though not to anyone in particular. My voice cracked, as if I was speaking just to the walls that had held me all these years. "I should have known when you started sending those snide emails about Emily's future. This was never kindness, was it?" The silence after that was deafening. No one coughed. No one clinked a glass. The only sound was the faint tapping of Anne's manicured nails against her folder. She straightened her back and tilted her chin. I don't expect you to understand. You've lived small, Maggie. But Emily shouldn't. She has potential. And frankly, you're letting her waste it here. Those words hit me harder than I could have imagined. Lived small. As if my decades of teaching children, of saving pennies to make. Sure, Emily had her drawing tablets, of sitting in the hospital waiting room when our mother took her final breath. Meant nothing. My face burned. Tears threatened. My insides felt hollow, like someone had scooped me out with an ice cream ladle. I wondered if my parents, gone too soon, would side with Anne. They always admired her fancy clothes and her promotions. Would they have thought I wasn't enough either? Emily's chair screeched back suddenly, the sound jolting us all. She stood, fists balled at her sides. Her cheeks were blotchy red, eyes shimmering. I don't want to live with you. Her voice shook, but it was steady enough to pierce through Anne's performance. I want to stay with Maggie. She's my family. The room quaked with that declaration. For a split second I was proud, fiercely proud. But Anne didn't take rejection well. Her smile chilled, as thin as a shard of glass. Emily, sweetheart, you don't know what's best for you yet. That's what guardians are for. I felt something die inside me in that moment. Something about the way she stripped Emily's voice of value, reducing it to childish whim. As if her grief, her protests, her heart didn't matter, all because Anne thought her wallet carried more truth than love ever could. I opened my mouth, but the words failed. What could I possibly say that would deflect the papers in her folder? Custody battles weren't won on love alone. I wasn't naive. I knew the courts valued financial stability, college tuition prepaid, private hospitals, and suddenly, everything I had worked so hard for, everything I thought was enough, felt paper thin. I excused myself. Though I barely remember walking, my legs felt foreign, numb. In the hallway mirror, under the dim gold light, I caught a glimpse of myself. Pale lips, wide, haunted eyes, a woman on the brink of shattering. My reflection scared me. I barely recognized her. Inside my chest, grief and fear tangled into one monstrous knot. Anne had broken something sacred, family trust. She had let me believe, for all these years, that our strained relationship still carried some semblance of respect. And here she was, knocking the breath out of me in my own home during Thanksgiving dinner, of all times. That night, long after everyone left, I sat awake, listening to the whir of the furnace. Emily had fallen asleep curled on the couch, tissues scattered on the floor beside her sketchbook. I wanted so badly to protect her. My hands brushed her hair back, and silently, I vowed. Anne may have broken my trust, but she had also woken something in me, something sharper, something stronger. And that was her first mistake. I didn't sleep the night after Thanksgiving. The house was too quiet, the silence pressing down like a heavy quilt. Emily lay curled on the couch, her chest rising and falling in uneven patterns, her cheeks still streaked with dried tears. I sat in the kitchen with a cold mug of coffee, staring at the shadows of the trees swaying through the blinds. Anne had made her move. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't just an empty announcement meant to rattle me. I knew my aunt well enough to understand that once she set her sights on something, she pursued it with brutal tenacity. She had filed papers, she had resources, and she had the arrogance to believe she'd already won. That was when my teacher's instinct kicked in. For decades, I had taught restless little ones to pay attention, to look beyond the obvious, to spot the hidden patterns in words and numbers. And now, it was my turn. If Anne wanted war, she was about to realize she wasn't the only strategist in the family. The first clue arrived on Monday morning. I was pouring oatmeal for Emily before school when the house phone rang. Mrs. Collins? A woman's voice asked formally. Yes, I answered, wiping my hands nervously on a dish towel. This is Janet Edwards from Monroe County Child Services. I'd like to schedule a home inspection regarding the pending custody review. The words felt like iron shackles clamping onto me. Pending custody review? My voice cracked. Yes, ma'am. Your sister-in-law filed the claim last week, she said gently. Not Thanksgiving. Last week. My stomach sank. Anne hadn't impulsively burst out with her plan at dinner. She had already been laying the groundwork, confident in her timing. She wanted maximum impact, maximum humiliation, to blindside me in front of family. That was her second mistake. Underestimating that information doesn't just intimidate me, it galvanizes me. That night, after Emily was asleep, I was tidying the living room when I found her sketchbook lying open on the floor. She had drawn a page full of jagged little shapes, black charcoal lines pressed heavy and angry. But in the margins, in neat handwriting, she had scrawled, "She can't take me if I don't want to go, right?" Seeing that note nearly broke me in half, but it also gave me my mission. I whispered into that dim, lonely living room. She won't take you, sweetheart. Not while I breathe. The more I replayed Thanksgiving in my head, the more tiny cracks appeared in Anne's polished presentation. At dinner, she had mentioned Boston schools, plural. She said she'd already researched 3 different private academies that could nourish Emily's talent. Strange, considering she hadn't even gained custody yet. Why research schools like that unless you were overconfident? And what else had she been planning behind my back? That was when the detective in me began to surface. I pulled out an old binder, the kind I used to keep worksheets in as a teacher, and I carved out sections: legal, financial, personal history, timeline, strategy. If I was going to fight Anne, I'd need to gather information the way you piece together a puzzle. I started with something simple. I Googled her. On LinkedIn, her headline read, "Senior Partner at Stanton and Meyer Consulting, Boston." Fluffy corporate titles didn't impress me, but what caught my eye was a line under her bio. Specializes in restructuring family-owned businesses to maximize profit. Family-owned businesses. My parents' hardware store. Suddenly, a faint thread tugged loose in my mind. Years ago, when Dad was still alive, he had mentioned something about Anne selling off part of her consultancy shares to relieve some debts. He said it casually, but I tucked it away. Now I wondered, was Anne really as financially unshakable as she pretended? The next weekend, I invited my sister Marie over for coffee, hoping to pry gently. Marie had always been Anne's reluctant admirer, starry-eyed about her brands and Boston apartment. But when I asked, "Did Anne ever say anything to you leading up to Thanksgiving?" Marie hesitated. Her spoon clinked against her mug. "She did mention something about you being overextended, Maggie. Said Emily would drown in small-town opportunities. She also, well," Marie's eyes darted down. "She hinted you might not be financially suitable since you took out that second mortgage." I set my coffee down, cold fury washing over me. That was private. How did she? And then I realized. My second mortgage had been through a regional bank where Anne's college roommate worked. Anne had always bragged about networking. Had she been snooping into my finances? That was when my strategy sharpened. If she intended to use my personal vulnerabilities against me, then I needed to find hers. I knew I couldn't go rifling through Anne's personal belongings, but sometimes information falls into your lap. And mine did, through a simple accident. I was at the library on a Tuesday, borrowing books on guardianship law, when one of the librarians, an old family friend, said casually, "Funny thing, your aunt was in here last month making copies of some legal-looking documents. I remember because she banged on the copier like it was broken, looked like debt restructuring paperwork." Debt. There it was again. I leaned in. Do you recall what company name was on top? The librarian squinted, thinking. Stanton. Something. Not her firm exactly. Looked like a bank demand notice if I had to guess. My mind raced. Anne, the woman who polished her nails with pride, who sneered at my modest pension, was perhaps not solvent? Could she really be drowning in financial trouble while plotting to make me look incapable of care? The irony was so sharp it could slice glass. Piece by piece, I strung the clues together on paper in my binder. Anne announced plans at Thanksgiving, but had filed custody papers a week earlier. She thrived on ambush. Emily's voice scribbled in the margins, desperate not to lose her home. Emotional testimony, potential legal leverage. LinkedIn bio bragged about family business restructuring, history of profit, over people, foreshadowing her agenda. Marie's slip about my second mortgage, proof Anne was digging illegally into my private finances. Librarian's memory of debt documents, cracks in her supposed financial superiority. The emerging picture was clear. Anne wanted Emily not for love, not even really for opportunity, but to parade her as a polished accessory. And yet, beneath her glossy exterior, Anne herself was standing on financial quicksand. Teaching had taught me structure, but motherhood, through Emily, had taught me endurance. I decided on a 3-part strategy. Strengthen my legal standing. I called a family lawyer recommended by an old school colleague, a woman named Deborah Klein, with a sharp bob haircut and sharper eyes. She told me, courts care about stability, not just money. Document everything. Your care patterns, Emily's school records, her artwork, therapy appointments if any. So I began. I printed report cards, attendance sheets, even receipts from her art classes. A paper trail of devotion and stability. Uncover Anne's vulnerabilities. I asked Deborah a simple question. If someone in debt is applying for guardianship, does that matter? She smirked. It matters a lot. A judge will not place a child in a financially unstable home. Those words energized me. I knew I needed proof of Anne's financial collapse, but I had breadcrumbs already. I just had to gather them into hard evidence. Prepare the counterattack. Anne had struck publicly at Thanksgiving to shame me. I would return fire the same way, public exposure. Except mine wouldn't be family theater. It would be calm, legal, devastating truth. She'd never see it coming. One evening, as Emily worked on a sketch at the dining table, she asked quietly, "Do they ask me what I want? In court?" Her voice cracked, and I realized she had been carrying this silent weight. "Yes," I told her softly. "Yes, sweetheart. They will ask you." She breathed out shakily. "Then I'm going to tell them I want to stay with you." Her voice was the strongest weapon of all. In that moment, I realized Anne had underestimated both of us. Not just me, the sister she tried to dismiss, but Emily too. The girl who had endured more loss than most adults yet stood tall enough to declare love louder than fear. That evening, I closed my binder, pressing my hand on its worn cover. Inside were pages of notes, evidence, timelines, strategies, all forming the quiet storm gathering beneath Anne's feet. She thought she was playing a game of money and influence. Little did she know, I had one card left to play: truth. And soon, that truth would unravel her piece by piece. The weeks leading up to the custody hearing were some of the hardest of my life. Each night, as Emily slept tucked under my grandmother's quilt, I sat at the kitchen table, binders spread open like a battle map. Every scrap of evidence I had gathered now had a place, a purpose. Anne thought this would be quick, that her money and polish would sweep me aside like dust. What she didn't expect was that I had been preparing a teacher's lesson, one that would expose her hypocrisy in the most public way possible. The hearing was held on a gray Monday morning at the Monroe County Courthouse. The rain had polished the cobblestones outside to a slick shine, and everything smelled faintly of wet earth and coffee. I wore my plain navy suit, the same suit I had worn to every school board meeting in my career, and Emily, clutching her sketchbook like armor, sat beside me. Anne swept into the courtroom 15 minutes late, draped in a tailored ivory coat and carrying a designer briefcase. Her heels clicked like a gavel against the marble floor. She smiled at me, a pitying curve of red lipstick, as if she'd already won. But little did she know, I had already placed my pieces. Judge Ramirez, a stout woman with sharp eyes, presided. She began the session with formalities before asking me to present my case. My lawyer, Deborah Klein, stood confidently. Your Honor, my client, Margaret Collins, has been the sole guardian of her sister Emily since the death of their parents. We have documented 2 years of consistent caregiving, evidence of thriving school performance, and Emily's clear wish to remain with Margaret. The judge nodded, noting each binder tab Deborah handed over. Emily's report cards, her doctor visits, art class receipts, and a glowing teacher's letter about her resilience. Then it was Anne's turn. Anne straightened her shoulders, her diamond earrings catching the light. Your Honor, I respect my sister's efforts, but I can provide what Maggie cannot. Financial stability, elite education, and a future beyond this town's limitations. Emily deserves opportunity, not small-town mediocrity. Her words tasted familiar. They were the same venom she'd spat at me over Thanksgiving turkey. But the judge wasn't swayed by smooth words alone. Deborah leaned into the table, locking eyes with me briefly, then asked calmly, Mrs. Myers, if financial stability is your central claim, would you provide documentation of your current assets and debts? The courtroom hushed. Anne's lawyer, a slick man in a too-shiny suit, cleared his throat nervously. My client is under no obligation. But the judge cut him off. If financial suitability is being argued, then yes, supporting documentation is required. Please present. For the first time, I watched Anne's expression falter. A tight crack showed in her porcelain mask. Slowly, she opened her briefcase and pulled out a packet. The judge flipped through it with silence, until her brows arched. According to this, Mrs. Myers, you've recently refinanced your own condominium. You have an outstanding balance of $147,000 in personal debt and 2 ongoing legal disputes tied to unpaid consultancy fees. The gasp that rippled through the courtroom felt like music to my ears. Anne flushed deep crimson, shifting uncomfortably as whispers echoed against the paneled walls. That was her third mistake, pretending to stand on solid ground when she was drowning. Deborah smiled thinly. Your Honor, we also have reason to believe Mrs. Myers has been engaging in inappropriate and borderline illegal methods to sabotage my client's finances. We submit an affidavit from Marie Collins, confirming Mrs. Myers disclosed details of Ms. Collins's second mortgage which she could not have known without violating privacy. The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Myers, did you or did you not access your sister's private financial information through unapproved channels? Anne stammered. I'd never seen her stammer. I might have heard it in conversation. Marie stood from the back of the room, her voice trembling but firm. She told me specifics, Your Honor. Numbers she could not have guessed. She bragged about her connections at First Capital Bank. The silence afterward was heavier than any lecture I'd ever given. Anne's hands trembled as she tried to hold her papers steady. She looked trapped, and for the first time I saw fear glittering in her eyes. That was her fourth mistake, forgetting that family whispers can echo the loudest in court. Finally, the judge turned to Emily. Young lady, I'd like to hear from you directly. Where do you wish to live? The room spun around us as Emily gripped her sketchbook. She set it on the stand and opened to a page. She had drawn our little house, smoke curling gently from its chimney, with two figures, me and her, holding hands on the porch. The detail was astounding, almost photographic. She looked at the judge, her voice quivering but strong. "I want to stay with Maggie. She's my family. She stayed when everyone else didn't. I don't want Boston. I don't want fancy schools. I just want her." Her words landed heavier than all the legal jargon combined. Even the clerk dabbed at his eyes. I set my hand against my chest, trying not to sob in the middle of a courtroom. Anne sank back into her chair, visibly pale. Just when I thought the hearing would conclude, Deborah delivered our final blow. "Your Honor, one more piece of evidence. We discovered Mrs. Myers has been attempting to use her role as a consultant to pressure Emily into promotional opportunities, effectively treating her not as a child, but as an asset." She slid forward printed emails, uncovered through discovery, between Anne and a Boston art contact. The message read clearly: "Once I obtain custody, I can position Emily's art talent for scholarships and portfolio showcases. It will also reflect well on our consultancy's family outreach programs." The courtroom reacted instantly, gasps, whispers, heads shaking. Anne had planned to use Emily as a brand accessory, not a daughter. At that moment, Anne's mask shattered completely. The judge's stern voice cut through. "Mrs. Myers, this is exploitation. In my courtroom, children are not commodities." And with that, the gavel came down. Custody firmly, irrevocably awarded to me. The sound of that gavel was a bomb, a thunderclap of justice. Anne's lips parted in shock, her body deflating as if someone had punctured a balloon. The woman who strolled in with diamond earrings now looked like nothing more than an aging pretender clawing at relevance. But it didn't end inside those wooden walls. News spread quickly within the family, then the community. By the next week, whispers reached Boston. Word about Anne's debt and attempted exploitation of her niece tarnished her reputation in her high-end consulting circles. Clients quietly pulled out. Her family-oriented image cracked wide open. And where was she at Christmas? Not seated at any family table. She had retreated in shame, reputation in tatters, finances collapsing. As for Emily and me, we returned to our modest house with renewed strength. On Christmas Eve, she handed me a wrapped package. Inside was her courtroom sketch of us on the porch, but this time she had added new details. The sky lit with stars. Our hands linked stronger than ever. I kissed her forehead, my chest swelling with pride. That night, as I set her gift on the mantel, I thought back to Thanksgiving. Anne's bold, cruel declaration in front of everyone. And I realized something remarkable. Her attempt to shame me had ensured her downfall. Her ambition had unmasked her own greed. And the courtroom, the very stage where she sought to strip me of family, became the arena where everyone saw her for what she truly was. Anne's greatest weapon, her obsession with appearances, was turned against her. That was her poetic justice. And slowly, I smiled. Because little did she know, when she stood at my Thanksgiving table declaring war, I already had one card left to play: the undeniable, unshakable truth of love. The weeks after the custody hearing felt surreal, like waking up from a long, cruel nightmare into the relief of dawn. For the first time in months, I could sit at the breakfast table with Emily without that gnawing fear that she might be taken from me. The paperwork was signed, the gavel had come down. On record, in every way that mattered, Emily was safe. But for Anne, the aftermath was brutal. Word spread quickly among our family and social circles. Anne had always thrived on reputation, her sleek image as the sophisticated career woman who had sacrificed for no one, yet bragged about living better than all of us. That image shattered the morning after her courtroom humiliation. Clients who prided themselves on hiring a consultant with a family values veneer began distancing themselves. Within 3 months, the Boston firm where Anne was a senior partner quietly phased her out, citing conflicts of reputation. Suddenly, the woman who wore diamonds at Thanksgiving was stuck selling off her ivory coat and taking freelance work just to cover the mountain of debts she had tried so desperately to hide. Even my sister Marie, who had once admired Anne's gloss, admitted over coffee, "I can't believe I defended her for so long. She wanted to turn Emily into some kind of trophy." Maggie, I see it now. You saved her. Friends, cousins, even our distant relatives called me in quiet solidarity. Some said things like, "I never trusted Anne's smile," or "We should have spoken up sooner." That validation meant more than I realized. It wasn't just about them affirming me, but about the truth being untangled from years of Anne's posturing. For Emily, the victory meant more than just staying home. It meant security, roots, and the knowledge that her voice mattered. For weeks after the hearing, she would hug me randomly, whispering, "Thank you for fighting for me." She signed her artwork with my last name proudly, as though to declare to the world where she belonged. Her sketchbook transformed. Where jagged, shadow-like shapes once filled the pages, suddenly there were drawings of vibrant trees, open skies, and cozy living rooms with sunlight pouring in. At the center of nearly every doodle, she always drew our little house or the two of us together. I watched her blossom not with Boston prep schools or private tutors, but with something far more precious: stability and love. Her grades climbed higher. She earned recognition in her high school art showcase, and her teacher called me one evening simply to say, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Emily is thriving." From what I last heard through the grapevine, Anne now lives in a small rental outside Boston, stripped of most of her social connections. She avoids family gatherings entirely. Every Christmas since that dreaded Thanksgiving, her chair at the table has sat empty. There's a kind of poetic symmetry in it. She tried to fracture the family in order to elevate her role, but in doing so, she exiled herself. And truth be told, part of me pities her. She placed her value entirely in appearances: money, luxury, control. Without them, what remained? For the first time in my life, I see her not as the towering aunt I once feared, but as a lonely woman who lost the only currency she ever valued: approval. As for me, I learned the hardest and most empowering lesson of all. My love and devotion were never small. Anne had tried to convince me that because I didn't have wealth, because my life was modest, my care for Emily wasn't enough. But standing in that courtroom, watching Emily testify with trembling courage, I realized love backed with consistency can outweigh financial power every time. I discovered that even ordinary people, retired teachers with pensions, secondhand suits, and cluttered binders, can bring down giants if they hold on to truth. I found out that family isn't measured in opportunities you can buy, but in the stability you give freely. And most of all, I learned never to mistake silence for weakness. Today, Emily is a junior in high school. She still sketches at the same dining table where betrayal once unfolded, but now she laughs while she does it. She insists on cooking dinner with me at least twice a week, experimenting with recipes from YouTube. Our home may not be grand, but it's filled with laughter, music, and the soft scratching of a pencil across paper late into the night. And me? I've found peace again. I volunteer twice a week at the local library and run a small after-school program for children who can't afford extra tutoring. Emily often comes with me, sketching portraits of the kids while they read. Whenever I feel doubt creeping back, I remember that Thanksgiving day, Anne's cold announcement in front of the family, and the way it all unraveled for her once the truth stepped into the light. Her attempt to erase me created my greatest victory. Not just keeping Emily, but proving to myself that I was enough, more than enough, all along. I share this story not just as a record of betrayal and revenge, but as an empowerment for anyone who's ever been told they're not good enough. You don't need diamonds to prove your worth. You don't need a fancy city address to legitimize your love. All you need is courage to stand up when someone tries to take what you've bled for, cried for, sacrificed for. Anne wanted to make me feel small. Instead, she revealed how strong I truly was. And that is the sweetest victory of all.